Tonight's loss is just a reflection of Kentucky's current state. This program is not built for March.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I feel like whenever we have these kinds of episodes, you tend to break away from the norm. At least how I tend to do these podcasts. In case you don't know, I'm Lance Dawe, host of the Locked On Kentucky podcast. Just in a state of confusion here today as we recap Kentucky's loss to Oakland in the first round of the NCAA Tournament. There's going to be a lot of things to dive into today. I know a lot of you are very, very frustrated, as am I, with the results of Kentucky's game in the first round of the NCAA Tournament. It is just a reflection of the state of this program. Like I said, we've been lied to. This team and this program, they are not currently built for March. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner? You can take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. You can check them all out today at nissanusa.com. I don't really feel like this episode needs a ton of introduction. If you are not subscribed already, please go ahead and do so wherever you're checking us out. Thank you for checking us out today. I'm sure a lot of you are going to have thoughts, opinions, a lot of them very emotional, as they should be, in the comments below. If you're listening on podcast, sound off on Twitter at LockedOnUK. Literally anything you have to say about this game, about this team, about this staff, I'm going to give my thoughts here, but I want to know what you think, because the state of this program is unacceptable. And the game tonight is just another reflection of what needs to be changed. Before we kind of before we start to look at the big picture, before we take a step back and really start to evaluate where we are at here, let's talk about this game. Heading into this game, I acknowledged a couple of different things in my preview episode. In my bracket preview, and whenever the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee actually released this bracket on Sunday, I said, on paper, this is the best matchup Kentucky could have gotten. And right now, I still believe that. And yet, still, Kentucky found a way to mess it up. They found a way to trip over themselves and lose a game in the first round of the tournament, and it continues a trend. It is a half a decade long trend with this program, failure in the postseason. Why did the Kentucky Wildcats fail again today? Oakland, as I mentioned in my preview episode, coming into this game hot. Pretty solid pieces, all things considered. They play an interesting style of basketball. It's a good team. Better than that St. Peter's squad, at least I think. I like their pieces. I think they're fun. Jack Gohlke made sure that everybody and their mother knew his name tonight. Coming off the bench, Jack Gohlke was 10 of 20 from not just the floor, he was 10 of 20 from the three-point line. He did not take a single inside shot. As we noted in the preview episode, he is strictly a three-point shooter. 10 of 20, that's a 50% rate, for 32 points off of the bench. Jack Gohlke averages 12.8 points per game. On occasion, in the NCAA tournament, you will see games where these mid-majors come in against Goliath and they have somebody on their roster that can cast that stone and cast it hard. And Jack Gohlke is one of those guys. He has officially cemented himself in NCAA tournament lore forever. A great game, a nearly unstoppable game from Jack Gohlke. I want to give him his props and acknowledge that he carried this team to a victory, and he played outstanding. Hit shots that were contested. He hit shots that were open. He banked in shots falling down. The man was going unconscious. It was entertaining, to say the least. And coming from the Kentucky side, it was near maddening to watch this happen over and over and over again. I could sit there and say that word over 10 times because he hit 10 threes. 10 of Oakland's 51 three-point shots that they made. Oakland ended up shooting 48.4% from beyond the arc for the game. DQ Cole was 3 of 3. Trey Townsend was 1 of 3. The only player that did not shoot well from outside the arc was Blake Lampman. He was 1 of 5, which was inefficient by his standards. But the Grizz came out and they lit Kentucky up from beyond the arc. A lot of the shots were just really tough. They just came out there and played the better game. They played gutsy, they played hard, and they hit their contested shots. You have to give them credit. They went off. Sometimes, even if you do play good defense, you're not going to be able to win the game because the team is just shooting well. That happens at every level of the sport, regardless of how good or bad the opponent is. You could have the best team in college basketball, and if you see something like tonight, where Jack Gohlke comes off the bench and gives you 32 points, they're going to hang around or they're going to win the game. And against a team like Kentucky, who ended up shooting inefficiently relative to their standards, it ended up costing them. So that's where it starts. This game, individually, it was a March Madness maddening performance. It was just a very frustrating performance from the Kentucky side. Nonetheless, a very good one from Jack Gohlke. The second thing I want to point to here is rebounding. Kentucky, as I have continued to point out, has 3 7-footers on their roster. And just because they do have those 3 7-footers does not mean they are effective at what you would assume 7-footers are good at. Kentucky has height, but what they lack is physicality. And you saw that again today. Zvonimir Ivisic, Aaron Bradshaw, Ugonna Onyenso. All 3 of those guys, to varying extents, struggled to protect the paint because they just simply did not have the muscle and the want to, I think in various instances, to do so. There's not really a whole lot you can do about that. There's not really a ton you can do about that. 32 games in, you can't all of a sudden give all 3 of these guys an extra 15 to 25 pounds. If you haven't gotten the want to out of them now, I mean, you are stuck with what you are stuck with. Trey Mitchell actually had a pretty decent game. 14 points, 13 rebounds, 2 assists. He did end up fouling out. He had 3 turnovers. One of them was crucial. But overall, played the best out of the big men. And I think it's because he has the strongest game. He's the best post-up game as well out of these 4 players, which is just crazy to think about. The smallest player out of Kentucky's 4 big men is the most effective. It's just wild to think about. Kentucky, though, struggled on the glass. They ended up getting out-rebounded by the Oakland Grizzlies, who do not play a single player taller than 6'9". 40-39. They grabbed 14 offensive rebounds. 14 of their 40 rebounds were offensive. And they got a decent chunk of second chance points off of them. And something that we noted in the preview is that Oakland does not do a great job of getting second chance points. They can get rebounds, but they normally don't get points. We saw that in the first half. We saw it really starting to hurt Kentucky at various points in the second, at least whenever it really, really mattered, where Kentucky needed to get a stop. Kentucky also turned the ball over. 11 turnovers, actually 12 total, if I'm not mistaken. ESPN stats, I think, are incorrect here. And Oakland got 12 points off of those turnovers, if I'm not mistaken. Oakland only turned the ball over 7 times. 7 times to 16 assists. You would assume that their offense, with the way that they operate it, they're going to be able to dish the rock a little bit, and they certainly did that. Kentucky also with 17 assists, but could not rebound. Turned the ball over carelessly in really important moments, both early in the game and at the very end of the game. You were down by 1 point. I believe it was Rob Dillingham that went to chuck the ball over to Edwards, and Oakland anticipated it, stole the ball, ran all the way down the floor. Reeves fouled him, put him on the line. Can't have things like that happen at the end of the game when you're hitting shots trying to will yourself back into the contest. Kentucky ended up shooting 32.1% from beyond the arc. 32.1%. In case you're wondering here, I can pull this up for you real quick. That is almost 10% lower than their season average. I don't really know what else to say about this individual matchup other than Kentucky's struggles came back to bite them in a game that they needed to win. And they ended up losing. Not much else to say here. They lost a game where their worst traits ended up showing the entire way through. It wasn't just a half. It wasn't just 3/4 of the game. It was all the way through. I thought this game was going to be uber competitive. You go back and watch my preview episode, I said that multiple times. I thought this game was going to be closer than the point spread because I thought Kentucky was going to play down to their competition. Turns out they did, and they lost. But what my expectation was is that Kentucky's talent level and that their coaching staff and their execution and their game plan would be able to carry them at the end of the day. I think I said it twice, and I need to go back and see how many times I said it. I said Oakland's good, and I think this is going to be competitive, but based on what I'm seeing on paper, they're not going to be able to keep up for a full 40 minutes. Sure, they may make this game competitive for 3/4 of the way through, but I think at some point Kentucky's going to be able to turn it on, focus up, and close the game out. That did not happen. Kentucky got close on numerous occasions in the second half, and yet they were still unable to execute. So now that we've just kind of assessed this game, you guys are probably not going to really care that much about the individual shooting splits. We'll get to some of the performances here in just a little bit, but there is a bigger issue at hand that I want to address. A bigger issue with the state of this program, because as I've mentioned a few times already, this program in its current state, unlike what John Calipari continues to tell us, this team and this program, I should say, is not built for March. And that is unacceptable given Kentucky basketball's history. Let's talk a little bit about some of the individual performances for Kentucky. Let's talk a little bit about that and the state of the program in just a second. Before I get into it, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Nissan. This week's March Madness Bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that has pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. The Yukon Huskies can only be described as an armada. This top-seeded team is as hardcore as it gets out there. It's no wonder they've landed the overall top seed in the NCAA tournament. They're one of the favorites to win it all, despite 4 of the Power 6 conference champions standing in the way in the East region. You can take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. You can check out all of these new 2024 SUVs over at nissanusa.com. That is nissanusa.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. You can say goodbye to busted brackets. I'm sure a lot of you now have a busted bracket. I know I've already checked the ESPN bracket pool. A lot of us do. You could say goodbye to them, though, because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, you can go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. That is $200 to use on point spreads. Money lines, you can even pick who's going to win it all, and I would be willing to bet my house that Jack Gohlke will not shoot as efficiently against the next opponent that he sees relative to what he did against the Kentucky Wildcats tonight. If you want to lay something down on that, you can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, continuing along here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, if you have not subscribed to the show already, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. Almost up to 7,600 subscribers on the YouTube channel. If you're listening on podcast, please subscribe there as well. And I'm going to ask you again. I know you're going to do it. I'm just pour it all out. Everything you think about this team, this program, the coach, everything, lay it all out in the comments below. This is a safe space for you to give your opinion on Kentucky basketball. Because again, this program is in a failing state. There is no arguing with that. There is no debating it. It is just simply a fact, and I think that all of you would agree with that. I don't think we're going to get a whole lot of pushback after what we just saw. Unfortunately, some of Kentucky's best players did not have great games. I'm not going to harp on these kids and their performances because what they contributed to Kentucky basketball this season, I think, far exceeded the expectations that we had during the preseason. So while we do love these players, I do have to acknowledge that Kentucky's two best guards coming off the bench just did not have good games. Reed Sheppard, 1 of 5 from the floor, 1 of 3 from deep, 4 assists, 2 steals, 2 turnovers, 3 points for what is projected to be a lottery pick, SEC Freshman of the Year, SEC Player, National Freshman of the Year, I should say, Sheppard looked nervous, he looked tight, he looked tense, and he just never found a rhythm. And I hate that for him. I really do. I wish that I could have got to see him play at least one more game in a Kentucky uniform. Unfortunately, that is how it's going to end. And that stinks for such a good player, for such a great player. Rob Dillingham, 2 of 9, 10 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, that one crucial turnover. Rob couldn't get it going. He couldn't hit a shot. Some of them were wide open. Towards the end of the game, he hit a couple of big threes, but that was it. Didn't contribute. And it really is upsetting to see two of Kentucky's best players go out with a whimper. That's all she wrote. The book is closed on their history with Kentucky basketball unless they miraculously decide to come back, which if I were a projected lottery pick, wouldn't be doing that. I'll tell you who did finish his career strong, at least individually, and that's Antonio Reeves. The unsung hero, it feels like, of this season. With all the talent and excitement surrounding him, Reeves continued to kind of get lost in the fold here, especially throughout the middle of the season. Reeves played poorly in Kentucky's exit in the NCAA tournament last season. This year, not the case. 11 of 18 from the floor, 5 of 9 from deep, 3 rebounds, 1 assist, 27 points. Second best scorer of the contest between both teams. 27 points. Reeves played his heart out. 35 minutes. He did everything he could. Couldn't ask for more. Loved this kid playing here. I'm going to be rooting for him whenever he makes his way into the NBA. Well, of course, we'll talk about these guys as they make their way to the NBA. But Reeves here, one of my favorite players to ever put on the blue and white, and I will miss him. Good individual performance today. DJ Wagner, probably his last game as a Kentucky Wildcat. In 17 minutes, Wagner was 0 of 5 from the floor, 0 of 4 from deep, had 2 rebounds and 3 assists. I don't want to rag on Wagner, but his outside shot, there needs to be some major corrections to if he wants to have success at his position playing in the NBA, because far too often he is not hitting his mark. He leaves a lot of things short. He left some things short today, left some things off balance. It's unfortunate that he went 0 for 5 to finish what is likely the end of his Kentucky career. So 3 of Kentucky's best players just not able to get it done. One of Kentucky's best players to end his senior season poured his heart and soul into the game, still wasn't enough. And here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently looking at a program that has not won a game to push them to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament since 2019. This team, I should stop saying this team. This program has not made it past the round of 32 since 2019. This year, first round exit. Last year, round of 32 exit. 2022 as a 2 seed, upset by St. Peter's. 2021, 9-16 for the Kentucky Wildcats. 2020, 25-6, ranked 4th in the country. Of course, we know COVID shut that down. 2019 made it to the Elite 8 with one of the best teams in the nation. Kentucky has not made it to the Final Four since 2015. That is almost 10 years since Kentucky has gotten back to where they expect to be. That is a failure. It is failure relative to Kentucky's expectations. And I think that we have to acknowledge 2 different things, okay? Talking about what Kentucky basketball is right now. I think we first have to acknowledge the frustrations from this season. It feels like gut reaction to this game is that Kentucky's talent, and I keep saying talent, putting it in quotation marks, and I'm not trying to say that in a negative connotation, just follow me here. The talent that they had was wasted. You had 4 5-star guards. Your 5th recruit in that big top 5, that was a 4-star, ended up being National Freshman of the Year. You had 4 5-star players. You had 3 7-footers on your roster. You had a Croatian center that played at 20 years old professional basketball in another country that you managed to get to come to your school after a long and drawn-out process. You were still able to make that happen. Just a very frustrating and arduous process. You were still able to make that happen. None of those guys, none of them were able to propel you to at least a round of 32 berth. You had all of this talent, and you could not mold it together to make the sculpture that you wanted to make. You had all these different pieces of clay, these types of clay. You could not get them to fit. One of 2 things is true underneath the blanket of wasted talent. One of 2 things is true, or it could be a combination of both. Either these players were never going to gel together, and despite being good individually, chemistry-wise, they were just never going to line up, especially on defense, no matter what any coaching staff in America could have done. Or the latter, this coaching staff failed this team horrendously. they were not able to get this team full of all of this talent to play cohesively, especially on the defensive end, and that is a failing on their part, not a failing of the players. Most people are probably going to tell you it's a mix of both. You know what? I think that's fine. I think it probably lies somewhere in the middle of that conversation. But here is the reality of not just what's wasted this year, what has been wasted under Coach Cal. The program, not this team, the program has continued to struggle on defense for years. Take a look at Kim Pom with me. Since, we'll just go through the whole Cal era. Why don't we do that? In 2010, Kentucky had the 6th best adjusted defensive efficiency in the nation. 2011, number 16 in the nation. Number 7 in the nation, took a dip in 2013 when they went to the NIT, 88th in the nation. Then they were 32nd. Then they were 1st, 39th, 7th, 22nd, 8th. Collectively, there are a lot of really good defenses. From 2019 all the way back to 2010, that's a decade's worth of good experience. And then in 2020, things started to take a little bit of a turn to where you weren't seeing Kentucky in the top 25 as often. You saw them ranked 52nd, 35th, 36th, and then these past 2 seasons, 68th and 111th. They dropped to 117th technically after this loss to Oakland. The program has been suffering on defense for years. The program, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, has not reached the second weekend of the NCAA Tournament in 4 seasons. It's more years than that, but it's 4 seasons, technically, if you want to take out COVID. That is unacceptable alongside the defense. The program has continued to bring in NBA talent in and out, and yet it fails to produce against important opponents. Top 25 teams, quad 1 teams, teams on the road, teams in the postseason, both the SEC and NCAA tournaments. The program has failed with talent and what is supposed to be a good coaching staff. Every single failure that Kentucky has, at least this season, comes back to the staff. You don't coach defensive effort, that's on coaching. You don't coach how to close games out properly, that is on coaching. You don't draw up good plays, that's on coaching. The players, if they take bad shots within those sets instead of running what you told them, 33 games in, guess what, guys? It's on coaching. I don't think a lot of you disagree with that. If you have a player that is continuing to defy you after an extended period of time, at some point, it has to reflect on you. Not only are you the one that recruited him to come play for you, but you also are the one telling him what to do. If he either can't do it or won't do it, it is, at the end of the day, your fault that he is in that position to begin with. Sure, we will blame some of the things on that player for making those rash decisions. Sometimes you can't really do much about that as a coach. But if you, for 5 years now, have continued to put players in these positions and they have failed time and time and time again, you start to see a pattern and you start to realize this isn't on the players that have come through this program. This is on the coaches. Something that fascinates me about Kentucky basketball and the way people kind of think about the way that their program works is that we are supposed to, over these last few years of mediocrity, we are supposed to just accept Cal because he's such a good recruiter. Do we not stop to think for a moment about what happens to these kids more often than not after they leave the program? They go on to find success as basketball players. Granted, it's on NBA teams. They're in a different environment, in a different system, finding different kinds of success. But as of now, with these players, wouldn't you like to think that if it's a Hall of Fame coach that has won a national championship before and has had all of these different accolades and successes, that he would be able to draw some of that out of his players while they're with him? Some of that NBA talent? Wouldn't you think that he'd be able to bring them together to get them to win at some point? And I guess the answer to that is, yeah, probably, but it hasn't happened. And so we've been kind of battling for a few years now, back and forth, this argument with Coach Cal and his staff as to whether or not they should still be here because they can recruit. Oh, well, they can bring these guys in, and nobody's better for the job than Coach Cal. And then you see a result that almost entirely reflects on coaching. Well, we're bringing in this recruiting class next year, so we need to give Cal another opportunity to really stick it with these guys because these guys are gifted. And then you see another failed opportunity. And then you saw this year the exact same thing. You saw Kentucky bring in this loaded recruiting class, all of this excitement surrounding these 5 stars and these tall players. Everybody was getting hyped up. Let's give them another shot. This team should be awesome, right? Another failed expectation. I think now we're at a tipping point. And I talked a little bit there about, unlocking some of that NBA talent, turning that into success at the collegiate level. I don't necessarily know with the current recipe in place that Kentucky will be able to do that, at least enough to satisfy the fan base ever with the current formula that they have. Let's talk about that a little bit more as we wrap up the show here. Before we just dive into that final topic, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Amazon Fire TV. It's your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing television. It provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on the latest in the world of sports, from March Madness to the NBA to the MLB and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. You can check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices, and if you have not checked them out, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That is Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. All right, wrapping up the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. The final game of the 2023-24 season has come to an extremely disappointing end. Final score of your game in Pittsburgh between Kentucky and the Oakland Golden Grizzlies, 80-79 in favor of the 14 seed. So we're talking here about the disappointments of the game itself, the disappointments of what has been wasted not just this year, but also over the past several years, And we're talking a little bit here about how Kentucky has all of this talent. They have all of these things going for them on paper before the season starts, and we have consistently seen failed results. We have seen the lack of results in the postseason. And Coach Cal, I think, went with a similar approach to what he's won with in the past this year. In today's game, and today's game has that term has dramatically changed over the past 3 years. But in today's game, you cannot win with a group of freshmen. Not anymore. You can't do that. Not according to trends in the regular season and in the postseason. Not according to analytics. You can't do it. You cannot win with a roster full of freshmen regardless of how talented they are. You need experience, and you need teams that have basketball IQ, that have played the game long enough to understand what's going out there on the court and understand what they need to do in certain situations. We can pull this up here pretty quickly. Kentucky ranks 196th in Division I experience. It's underneath an average of 2 years of Division I experience per player. Oakland, sitting at 2.2 years, just outside the top 100 nationally. And they're starting five: a junior, a senior, a senior, a senior, and a junior. Their backup 2 is a senior. Their backup 1 is a junior. There is one sophomore in this rotation. One sophomore player in this rotation. Oakland has experience. There are other teams in this conference that Kentucky basketball faces off against that have experience and find success. Tennessee, almost 2.77 years of experience per average player, 29th nationally. Auburn, 2.13 years, 119th nationally. Alabama, 2.48 years, 61st nationally. The best teams in college basketball, and this is the point I want to make. This is the point of emphasis that I want to talk about. The teams in college basketball that have success in the postseason now, as opposed to 15 years ago, are made up of veteran presences that can get the job done, even if they don't have a ton of talent. They have knowledge and experience, and that's what carries them forward. Something else that we need to kind of talk about with Kentucky, and this is going to be something that we talk about a ton this offseason, is not just the type of player, but the setting that you put them in. I think players like former NBA players like JJ Redick have talked about this a lot. When it comes to the college game, there are so many things that are not modernized. There are so many things that are just different at the end of the day compared to what the NBA likes to run offensively and defensively as well. It's significantly less complex, and it's more of a team game as opposed to your individual stars are going to shine in isolation situations. Programs that find success at the collegiate level now run systems. UConn, Houston, Auburn, Purdue, Tennessee, North Carolina, all of these teams run systems. All of these teams have balance. UConn, I think, is a perfect example of this. With what Dan Hurley has put together, they are experienced and they are balanced. I cannot prove this definitively, but after watching it, and after watching other teams, and after seeing dramatically different results, I'm starting to think that the way Kentucky wants to approach their game with the style of offense that they play, with the style of defense, the constant man-to-man, the lack of desire to go to a zone at any sort of point, it's starting to make me think that maybe this isn't for Kentucky in college basketball. Maybe Kentucky needs to start doing something else. Maybe they need to bring in somebody else that can spark some change and create some of these different things and start to do some of these different practices that these other successful basketball programs do. I understand that now more than ever, it is difficult to win NCAA championships and get to the Final Four with consistency. What is not difficult to do, however, is to put together a roster of players that understands the game, has some level of talent, and can go out and execute at a consistent level on the road against good opponents and at home against good opponents. UConn, again, I think is a prime example of this with Dan Hurley. He has built that program up over the past 6 seasons, and he has gotten them to the point where they have experience, talent, and a system in place. It takes a little bit of time, but teams have gotten there. I think Auburn is another really good example of this. They found a way to get guys to stick around and play for years on end, and now they're heading into this tournament. Of course, they could still lose tomorrow. They're heading into this tournament as a veteran, solid team. Purdue, another great example of this. Another team that has a lot of really good experience. Matt Painter has a lot of really good experience built up in his system because he's been there so long at Purdue. And while they may not necessarily have the NCAA tournament success that the national media or their fan base wants, they are doing things that Kentucky is not in the regular season. They're winning against some of these other tough opponents. Houston, another phenomenal example of this. Experienced backcourt. Jamal Shedd, LJ Cryer, both seniors. Really, really, really good guards. One of the best defenses in the nation, arguably the best defense in the country. The past 4 years, you could say 5 or 6 years actually, for Kelvin Sampson, they have had a system in place, and they've been balanced, and they have won. And over the last 3 years, Final Four, Elite Eight, Sweet 16, they've at least been able to do something that Kentucky hasn't done in half a decade, which is get past the round of 32. Do you understand where I'm coming from here? The way Kentucky basketball operates has not been successful for half of a decade. And so now I'm looking around, I'm seeing what these other programs have been doing for 5, 6, 7, 8+ years, and I'm starting to think, there may need to come a change. There may need to be something different happening here in order for Kentucky to have success like these other programs. The game is moving on, and I think it is time for Kentucky basketball to respond by making changes. This coaching staff, if they are still here when the ball is tipped in November of 2024, there needs to be some dramatic changes. There's going to be a lot of people over these next few weeks calling for this staff's position and their job. All I know is that there needs to be change. What an upsetting game. What an upsetting season for Kentucky basketball. And I think that's where you leave it for now. What do you do moving forward with this staff? It'll be interesting to see. $42 million is a large buyout. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_ and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all later for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and God bless.